Hi, today we're going to talk about price. We'll start by reviewing value. Earlier, we said value is some judgment of the net worth of a product or a service to a customer. It's some function of the benefits, things that the customer gets from the product versus the cost, what they have to give up. And we talked earlier about, three different types of benefits. Functional benefits. It does something to help you achieve a goal. Psychosocial. It makes you feel better about yourself because others feel better about you or boosts your self-esteem. And experiential. That it creates a feeling. It appeals to the sensual side of us. And we have three different types of costs. Financial, something of value. Time and effort. Effort's the energy that we have to put out to acquire a product. And the basic reason why value is so important is customers pick the alternatives that have the highest value. The more value, the more attractive your offering is to the potential customer. Now, how can marketers get more money? Because that's what they want. All right. One, increase the benefits. That increases the value. People are more likely to purchase, or you can charge more. Decrease the overall customer cost. That also increases the value. You can charge more because you have excess value, or people will buy more often. The third way is to reduce the other two types of costs that the customer has. In this case, time and effort. Reducing those costs enables you to raise the financial costs, what you charge, let's say, in money for the product, because it's balanced out. So we can think about products and services that save us time, make it easier, brand loyalty, convenience stores. They're often trading reduced time and effort, and we're willing to pay more for it. Before we look at different pricing objectives, we're going to examine 5 factors that influence your ability to set the price that you want. So what sets the highest price that somebody would pay? It's the benefits that they get from the brand. You wouldn't buy a pair of sneakers or a phone if you thought the price, your cost, was greater than the benefits. So what sets the minimum price? Yes, you guessed it. It's cost. And usually we talk about variable costs. The costs that vary with production as opposed to fixed costs, which would be something like the mortgage for the factory and other constant costs that you have. So as we can see, benefits for the potential customer, that's the most you can charge. Under normal circumstances, the minimum you can charge is your costs, because as a business, you need to make a profit. There are times when companies sell below their costs. When they have excess inventory they need to move, especially if it's perishable. It's going to go bad, or it's going to go out of season, where they need to move products through the supply chain to get it to the end user. Companies use loss leaders. Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Sell a select number of products at below cost in the hopes of bringing buyers to their store or website where they'll spend more money. Relationship building. Apple, Google, Amazon, Disney now with the Disney streaming and ESPN streaming, they have their own ecosystems where they have a suite of products and services that all fit together. So if they can get you into their ecosystem, you buy an iPhone, and then you get Apple Music, and then you decide to buy an iPad, and maybe an Apple TV, and so forth. They get you in there, so even though they may not make any money on the initial purchase, during the long term they will. Pez and razor handles, right? Gillette will give away razor handles so that you try their new blades. The blades are very expensive. They give away the razor handles at a loss. Inkjet printers, inexpensive inkjet printers sell for $20 to $30. So does the ink. The ink is more expensive. That's where they make their money. And so when you do something building a relationship, a lot of it is guided by the lifetime value of your customer. What are they worth to you? How long will they stay with you? How much do they spend over time will often determine how much money you can invest in terms of not making a profit to get them as a customer. The government monitors pricing and has a big say in what prices they allow companies to charge potential customers. The government monitors pricing to make sure there's a level playing field in terms of competition among companies. Competition is what makes our system work for everybody. The more competition there is among companies, the more they're driven to provide better value, lower their costs, improve quality, and do research and development. Therefore, society as a whole gains. So the government is sensitive to price discrimination, different pricing for different customers for the same products or services. You can charge different prices when, for example, companies buy in volume, but those pricing schedules need to be available to everybody. You certainly can't charge different prices for different protected groups. And you are allowed to change your price in a competitive situation, but you must document it. Now, price fixing is when sellers get together and tacitly agree to sell all at basically the same price. So they're not going to compete on price. Obviously, it's anti-competitive. The tuna industry, Bumblebee and others, pled guilty and were fined $300 million for price fixing. Apple and other producers of ebooks were charged with price fixing. NESCAC colleges, the Amherst, the William, the Wesleyan, the Bowdoin, they all had their tuition within a few $1,000s of each other. They didn't want to compete on price. They would compete on other things, but not on price. And right now, generic drug manufacturers are being sued for price fixing, for raising prices together for basic drugs that are all available as generics. Predatory pricing and unfair trade practices are when companies sell their products much below market costs. So they could get more money for their brands or their products, but they decide to sell it for a lot less, usually to try to gain market share at the expense of other companies and driving them out of business. For example, dumping, whether it's Chinese steel, Canadian lumber. In the past, it was Japanese cars. They were accused of selling their goods below market rates, where they could make a decent profit and still be less expensive than American-made products, but they were setting a price very low in order to drive out the American manufacturers so they could dominate the market. So everybody's very sensitive to predatory pricing and unfair trade practices. It's difficult to prove because many times people will argue that, well, in this case, the American companies aren't very competitive. And if they would adopt the latest business techniques and methods, they would be more competitive. Competition also influences your ability to set a price. Your competition has a big impact on your pricing. It comes down to value. What's the value your potential customers see in your brand versus the value they see in your competitors' brands? Strong competitors often make it difficult to raise your prices and can force your price down. Weak competitors let you raise your price and still maintain better value. Samsung, And Apple in the phone market, they have much higher prices than Google Pixel, LG, Huawei, and other phone manufacturers because they have very high perceived value. The last factor is, what are your objectives? What are you trying to accomplish in setting your price? Profit objectives can either be trying to maximize profit, reach some target profit, like we want to make $100,000 in profit this quarter, or maximizing return on investment. Return on investment, or often called ROI, is net profit divided by how much money you had to spend to get that profit. The problem or issue with profit objectives is, yeah, they sound great and they're good for your company, but they may not be in touch with the real world, especially if your products don't have the value to support those profit objectives. Skim pricing is another term that means to charge a high price comparatively to your competitors. It's often used in the beginning stages of the product life cycle. Set a high price. And it makes sense. There are some advantages. One, especially if you're introducing a brand new type of product, being able to charge a higher price earns you more money. You can recoup your investment. So as you see with many new types of electronics, the initial prices are quite high. Tesla's first electric cars were very expensive. And they're still expensive, but now you can get a Tesla for just about $40,000, brand new. And also, you remember when it's early in the product life cycle, you pretty much have a monopoly until you have a viable competitor. And that's less likely to happen if there are high barriers to entry for your competitors. In other words, it's difficult or very expensive for competitors to get into the market because either they don't have the money or the technology or the know-how to compete. One of the issues with skim pricing is that because you have very high profit margins, you attract competition. So once competitors can figure out how to get in the market, you're going to get a lot of competitors. And then they're going to attack you on price. So where you'll have to either lower your price or come out with more models. And that's what most people do. They come out with more models. We call that a modified skim pricing approach. So, for example, if Samsung comes out with some brand new television technology, they charge a really high price. And then finally somebody else will come along, say Vizio or LG, and they'll have similar technology, and oftentimes they'll offer their initial sets for a little bit less. Now, Samsung can drop their price, which kind of hurts their image, and says, well, we're not really any better than them. Or what they are more likely to do is to keep their flagship original brand, even price it higher, but introduce a new model that undercuts or is the same price as their competition, but has a few less features. So you can still get a Samsung, but maybe not quite as much as the Vizio or the LG, but with Samsung's high brand equity, most people will go for that. And that happens as new competitors come into the marketplace and are able to carve out niches with price-sensitive customers. The hard part in the end is you have to manage all those different models. You have to be good at pruning or trimming your product lines down in order to remain profitable because it costs you money and it's expensive to maintain a lot of different models, especially if a large portion of them aren't selling well. You could also try to maximize your sales or revenue. Try to be the leader in market share. We often call this a penetration strategy. We want to penetrate more into the market to increase it. So we set a low price that encourages new buyers, right? And also encourages repeat buyers. There are some advantages. One, by having a low price, you increase the value of your brand. You make it more competitive. It's more compelling to your customers. It gives you a chance to gain a lot of customers early, build up loyalty, create a unique and distinctive experience with them. It discourages your competition because not only do they have to bear the cost of entering the market, once they're in, they're not going to make a lot on each thing they sell. And you can also benefit from the experience curve. The experience curve is the idea that the more you do things, the more experience you have doing the things over and over again, the better you get at it. So this means that you become more efficient and you're able to produce and distribute your product for less money. You lower your costs. So if you have a low price initially and people buy a lot, you're going to gain a lot of experience quickly, which will enable you to lower your costs, which will then either increase your profits, but also give you a cost advantage compared to your competition. What are the downsides? Well, if you lower your prices, you need to be able to make up the loss in margin with higher sales volume. You can sacrifice today, right, and then later on in the product life cycle during maturity, reap the benefits, but that doesn't always happen. And on top of that, product life cycles are shorter and shorter with the constant change in technology, communication, social change within our markets. Again, just having a low price may not make very good value if your product can't perform. And then price isn't always the most important thing to people. We can also think about the value price has and its ability to communicate something about our brand. We refer to this usually as the price-quality relationship. Oftentimes we infer, right, that a higher price for a brand means it has a higher quality. When is this most likely to happen? Well, first of all, we need to believe that there are real differences between the brands. If you think different brands of salt or motor oil or cooking oil are all the same, then a brand with a higher price doesn't mean that higher quality to you. It just means it's more expensive and it has poor value. If we have a lot of expertise and we're very knowledgeable about the type of product or brand, then we don't need to rely on price as a cue or for information about the brand because we already know how to judge it. We're more likely to use price as an indicator of quality when it's difficult to judge products, right? Even if we have a fair amount of knowledge, all right? So things like jewelry, college tuition in colleges, wine, yachts, mattresses, restaurants, and lots of different services, it's difficult to judge the quality. You can't read a label. You don't know what the ingredients are. It's a service. So what do? You tend to assume that the higher the price, the better the quality. Just think you're going on vacation and you're going to pick from a bunch of different resorts you've never been to. So you're going to assume that the higher priced resorts are going to offer better quality. Not always true. You can also set your pricing based upon your competition. Usually this is done to maintain your position in the marketplace as either having low prices or the lowest prices, or perhaps having the highest prices, being a luxury brand, being the premium brand. Companies will often match prices, especially retailers. Why? The idea is to eliminate price as a concern. So if I have to buy something to fix up my home, I know that Home Depot will match. Yeah, they have pretty good low prices. Sometimes Lowe's or Walmart or other places will have lower prices, but if I buy the same thing, I know I can get that price. So I don't really think about price anymore. I go to Home Depot because it's the closest and they have a huge selection. You can also think about your price relative to your competition. So Verizon charges more than Sprint. Sprint can't charge as much as Verizon because it doesn't provide as much value. So Verizon lowers their price. Sprint must drop it too. All right, they have to have a certain distance. They have to be so much, a certain amount cheaper than Verizon to attract customers. Now, if Sprint raises its price, Verizon can go ahead and raise their price too. Right, as long as they are far enough above them, they can maximize their profit. If you think about what we first started talking about, perceived value pricing makes a lot of sense. So when you go to buy something at the store or online, do you really care how much it costs the manufacturer to make it? The answer is usually no. You only care about what it costs you. So pricing really isn't connected to your cost. It's really connected to your relative value. So if you're coming up with a new product, let's say you're an entrepreneur, a new type of product, before you can figure out a price, you need to figure out what it's worth to people. How much would they be willing to pay for it? What's the perceived value? What's the value they're willing to pay? Once you know that, and then you can calculate your costs, you can figure out whether or not it makes sense economically to develop the new product. If you can't make enough profit to make it worthwhile, then your next task is to find a way to add more value by either lowering your costs, potential costs, or adding more benefits. So really, in the final analysis, we could kind of argue the market sets a price. You can set whatever price you want, but essentially your value relative to the competition is what's ultimately going to determine your price. Yield management is a pricing system where you charge different amounts at different times. So usually in the beginning you have low prices to stimulate demand or to help move a lot of inventory. As demand grows, as your inventory decreases, you raise your prices. The prime example of this are airlines. And it works well for them because they have high fixed costs. In other words, they still have to pay the airport. They have to pay the pilot, the co-pilot. They have to pay the flight attendants. It doesn't matter if there's one person on the plane or 300. They have to pay for the fuel. And the plane's going to leave at a certain time. So what they do is, in the beginning, when the flight becomes available to be booked, the prices are low. Once they're pretty sure that they're going to get enough passengers to break even, then they start to raise the prices. And as more and more seats fill up and there's fewer left, they charge more because it's more demand. It's a scarce good. There's not as many. Their capacity, their inventory of seats is decreasing. And then when they get right to the time before the plane leaves, if they have any open seats, they'll offer them to standby flyers who pay a lot less, but at least they get some money for those seats. The same thing is true for resorts or hotels. Hotels often in the advance, if you book early, you get a pretty low price. And then as you wait and as the hotel begins to fill up and be closer to capacity where there's no vacancy, they raise the prices. And then if a hotel or motel has open rooms and you go there relatively late at night or that day, you can often get a really good price because their costs don't change very much whether you're in the room or not. So they might as well sell the room and get something for it instead of letting it be empty. We're going to switch gears and talk about demand curves and elasticity, an important topic in both marketing and economics. A demand curve shows the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. Normally, higher prices lead to lower demand levels. Lower prices lead to increased demand. For example, in the graph to the right, at a price of $5, only 10,000 units are demanded. At a lower price of $1, we have almost 52 or 54,000 units demanded. Now, it is possible to have an inverted curve. In other words, some products increase in demand with the higher price. These are usually status, prestige, or snob appeal products, such as artwork, jewelry, perhaps yachts, things that show off one's status. Elasticity, or more formally, the elasticity of demand with respect to price, measures the price sensitivity of customers in terms of how much they buy. In other words, do they buy more and how much more when the price drops? And do they buy less and how much less when the price goes up? It's simply a measure of price sensitivity for different demand curves. Elastic demand means that customers are price sensitive, so that when the price goes down, sales go up so much that the total amount of money, the total revenue collected, is greater at the lower price than when it was at the higher price. If you look at the graph to the right, you'll notice that when the price on the vertical axis was $1 and the quantity demanded was 3, the total revenue, if said simply 3 units and $1, was $3. When the price drops from $1 to 75 cents, the amount demanded or purchased became 9 units. So 9 units times 75 cents is equal to $6.75, which is certainly larger than $3. So as price goes down, people buy it even more, so that in terms of your total sales or your total revenue, you get more. When price increases, the same thing happens, except in the different direction. So if you started with a price of 75 cents, your total revenue was, like before, $6.75. When you increase your price by 25 cents or 25%, you see that your total revenue, your total sales plummets 3 times, from 9 to 3 units. That's 3 times less. So increases in price cause consumers or customers to buy much fewer units, such that your total revenue is less even though you increased your price. So what are the implications? Well, first, if demand is elastic, then it may make sense to reduce your prices in order to increase your demand and total revenue. Now, the one thing you have to be careful of is lowering your price doesn't necessarily lower your costs. So it may not lead to an increase in profit. However, if by lowering your prices increases your demand, which then helps you lower your costs of production from the experience curve, then lowering your prices when demand is elastic makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, if you need to increase your price because you have an increase in costs, you have to think about it very carefully, because raising your price is going to cause your total revenue to decrease because customers are very sensitive. They'll either buy a competitive brand or they'll switch to a different product category. Products tend to be elastic, or brands tend to be elastic, when they're viewed as commodities, meaning there's no real differences between them. They're all the same. And also when they're widely available substitutes, meaning that, hey, if the price of orange juice goes way up, I'll drink tomato juice. If that's a good substitute for many people, then demand will be elastic for orange juice, because as the price goes up, people will switch. When demand is inelastic, buyers are not price sensitive. So when the price goes up, sales don't drop off very much at all, and total revenue will actually increase. So you can see on the graph there to the right, if you started with a price of 50 cents, the amount demanded was 5. Total revenue would be $2.50. If you increase your price to $1.50, price declines from 5 units to 3, but total revenue actually increases because you're getting 3 units at $1.50, so that's $4.50. $4.50 is definitely greater than $2.50. So when demand is inelastic, consumers aren't really sensitive to changes in price. It also means that if you drop your prices, reduce your prices, people aren't going to buy that much more. They're not really price sensitive. They only perhaps can consume or use so many. So inelastic demand is the opposite of elastic demand. Now, why are some things inelastic? Well, first of all, it may be a necessity, or there may be very few options or substitutes. Demand for gasoline is pretty inelastic. We really don't drive that much less, and much of the time we have to drive because we have to get to work, go shopping, and do other things. Demand tends to be inelastic when the item being purchased or considered is relatively inexpensive compared to our whole budget. We don't really worry about how much a small item changes in price, something that costs $1, when altogether we're going to spend $500. Also, Apple and Samsung can continue to raise their prices. Demand for them, for their products or brands, are really pretty inelastic because they have so much value. They're so much better, there's excess value in them, that they can raise their prices and still be a much more attractive alternative. And again, as we said before, luxury items often are more valuable, are seen as being more desirable, the more expensive they are. So the implications are, hey, if demand is close to inelastic, or you're not sure, keep raising your price. As long as total revenue is going up, you can continue to raise your price until it levels off. And if you're in a market where demand is inelastic, lowering your price won't get people to buy more. So you have to find some other way to add value or to create demand by either adding new benefits um, or being able to sell your product in larger quantities. Next, we're going to look at pricing adaptations. This means ways to modify your price that aren't so obvious to people. One is bundling. Bundling is when you take one brand and then you add a complementary brand to it. And then you sell the bundle, the two brands together, for less than what someone would pay for the individual items. Now, one advantage to bundling is it helps increase your overall sales revenue. So if cash flow is an issue or you're trying to raise sales, bundling is a good way to do that. For example, you'll see bundling with gaming consoles and controllers. And the controllers might be bundled at a discount, but the retailer overall collects more revenue. Bundling is also good for moving slow items that aren't doing particularly well. You can add them to another product to create a bundle. Again, the price for the bundle is less than the two items separately, and you get to move slow products. For example, gaming consoles often are bundled with games, and it's possible to bundle them with games that aren't selling particularly well. So actually, you might even increase the price you get for them in the bundle than if you tried to sell them separately. So the next adaptation is how to raise your price without increasing the price. In other words, people often have an idea of what something should cost, a reference price, and they won't consider anything with a price greater than that reference price. Maybe it's a bag of potato chips and it shouldn't cost more than $1.50, $10 for a bottle of wine, $30,000 for a car. But so the question then is, if you're at the reference point, you can't raise your price anymore. So how can you raise your price and earn more profit when you really can't raise it because people won't even consider it? Well, there's some different methods. First one is shrink the product, make it smaller, reducing your cost. Candy bars have gotten smaller and smaller and continue to get smaller at a much faster rate than the price. Use less expensive ingredients, materials, or packaging. Paper instead of foil, plastic instead of metal, simulated diamonds and jewels instead of real. Reduce the amount of product features that are expensive to make. Unbundle free services and support. No 1-800 numbers. Cut the warranty down from 3 years to 2 years. Don't provide additional services for free. And finally, reduce the number of different models you have within your product line so that your cost of manufacturing goes down. These are some different ways to increase your profit without increasing your price.